Good day, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of English with Chris. And today I'm going to try and do a little bit shorter of an episode, but we're going to focus on another one of the core auxiliaries in English, the core grammars of English. So one of the main auxiliaries that is very common, and that's simple past, or as I like to call it, did do. Okay, and so we're going to talk about some of the same things we've talked about before. So if you've watched the past videos, this is going to be a little more familiar for you. It should start coming a little bit easier because it's going to follow the same patterns that we used last time in the last videos. Okay, so the first thing we're going to talk about today is the basic form. And then we're going to go on and we're going to talk about regular versus irregular forms because this is simple past. It's a little bit special, but I like it. It's fun, so I hope you enjoy it too. And then the last we'll do, meaning for me is the most important thing. And so we have to talk about what does it mean? And we'll look at a few short examples just to give you a really good idea. So I hope you join me for the rest of this episode, and I hope it's helpful. Okay, so now let's talk about the basic form of simple past or did do, okay? Now, I know I said I was going to talk about meaning a little bit later in the episode, and that's still true, but I would like to just mention the meaning here, and so that we can, when we go through this, it'll be a little more clear for you. So the meaning of simple past is very similar to simple present, and or do and does do. Okay, so when we talked about them, I mentioned that they represent truth. Right? The present truth, the truth about your life sort of now. For example, if you remember, I teach, right? That's just true about my life because I do it all the time. I'm doing it right now, okay? So this is simple past. And so what we're talking about really here is past truth or past fact. And it's similar, or it's used often when we talk about events, especially, and specific points of time, like yesterday or at 6 o'clock in the morning, something like that. Okay, so here's the basic form. So it's very similar to what we talked about many times before, right? We talked about this subject auxiliary verb combination in the middle, and it works the same way as the last time. So there are some different forms. So the first one, if you remember, is strong form, where you see the auxiliary, it's marked, as I mentioned in past videos. And so you can see right here, this is the auxiliary, and this is the verb, and this is the strong version again. They did do their homework. And we use this, same as before, when we want to show that it's really true. Maybe someone thinks we're lying, especially, when you're talking about doing your work. Did you really do it? And so you might say, they did do their work. Meaning, it's extra true, okay? And we're talking about a past event though, right? So maybe last week or yesterday even, okay? And then, as we talked about before, you now can move the auxiliary around because the auxiliary represents sort of the perspective. We've talked about that before. The verb is the action, and the auxiliary is how you place that action in reality. Okay, so what are we talking about? We're talking about past reality. So we join them together to create normal. And you might recognize here, what you might be seeing is what you might be more familiar with, ED, okay, in English. And everybody knows ED, okay? And you can kind of see it right here, although it's ID. The spelling doesn't really matter. What's more important is the meaning that it gives us, okay? And then, of course, as we talked about before, the negative always joins with the auxiliary, same as before, okay? And so you can see when we want to say it in negative, we have to move the auxiliary back to the other position. And then we can say they didn't do their work. Almost said homework. But that's okay. They didn't do their work, okay? And you can say that strong, or you can say it normal. They didn't do their work. They didn't do their work. And so you can stress it and add more meaning to that. And then of course, as we talked about, you can make the question. Okay, and you're just moving it through, around, and in this one, in this case, you switch it with the subject of the sentence, right? And so now we can have, did they do their work? To create the question. And then of course, we also use the auxiliary to create the short answers, the yes they did, no they didn't. And again, you can sort of see the ED here a little bit, and you'll see it more when we talk about the next section, which is regular versus irregular forms of verbs. So join me in the next section. Now, in this next part, we're going to talk about the difference between the two types of simple past or did-do verbs, because there are two very different types, but still very similar, because it always works the same way. It's just that for regular or normal verbs, I guess you could call them, but the textbooks call them regular, and you know this as the ED. Okay, and so that's probably very familiar with you. And so some examples of regular are over here. We've got the strong and the normal, and we can also do the negative and the question, just like I showed you with the basic form. And we'll look at some of that when we do some examples in the next section. So we see right here the strong version, so we could say did walk, or we can join them together the same way we joined, does, do, does. So does walk, walks, okay, or do walk, walk, okay. And so we've talked about those in the past, and so it's the same thing. So what you're doing, this did and this ed are the same thing. They're the same word. They're the same meaning, I guess, is the best way to think about it. They represent the reality, the context of this verb, and they go together, and there's two ways to do it. So strong form, did walk, I did walk yesterday, or I walked yesterday, okay? And that would be the normal form, and you can choose, it's your choice. And then if you want to make the negative, of course, you would say didn't. You would put the auxiliary back in this position in front of the verb and add the negative, okay? Here are some more examples. We've got did jump. So you could say they did jump out of the boat, right? Or they jumped out of the boat, okay? So again, you're just moving it. This is the same thing. It's the same, it represents the same meaning. It is the same meaning. And this is the form that shows that meaning, okay? And then the last one, we've got did add, right? I did add the milk to the basket, or whatever you want to say. And then that's the strong, right? And then normal added, right? I added the milk to the basket. And so this is what we call regular, because they use ed, okay? And it's always ed. Now, sometimes these eds have different sounds. I believe there's 3 different sounds in English, and maybe I'll do another video about that, but I'm not super big on pronunciation, but I could still do a video about it maybe one day, but not today, okay? So next, I want to just talk about irregular form. So irregular form works the same way as far as switching and moving, but instead of using ed, it's spelling. The spelling change, or the change of spelling, gives us the same thing as an ed, right? I mean, really, you're changing the spelling over here too. I mean, these words are very different spelling. And so it's really the same thing, kind of. It's just not ed. And these ones are, you kind of have to just memorize them and try to remember them. And oftentimes my students will go, fly, flew, flown. They do the three forms, they just say them. And that can help to remember these regular verbs, but they work the same way. So I can say, did run, I did run yesterday. Strong, right? Okay. Or I can join them together the same way I'm joining these together, but this time, when I join them together, I have to change the spelling. And, I talked about marked and unmarked. Marked means you can see the auxiliary Here it's marked. You can clearly see them. Here it's marked. And I ask my students, is this marked or unmarked? Because unmarked means you can't see it, right? And so often they say, it's unmarked. And I say, are you sure? And then they go, no, wait a minute, it is marked. The spelling change, right? That spelling change, you can see that. That's very different from R-U-N, R-A-N. It's almost a different word, isn't it, right? So this is the auxiliary, which is the meaning of, past truth, which I talked about a little bit earlier, right? So again, here's another example with fly, right? I did fly the airplane, okay? That's strong. I did fly the airplane. Or I flew the airplane. I flew the airplane. And if you look, again, you're just changing the spelling. I mean, it's almost the same thing. This is ED, this is EW, right? And so that's kind of similar, right? So flew, I flew the airplane, okay? And then the last one down here, I did bring the cola, right? Or I brought the cola, right? And so again, you can see this one has a really big change. The only letters that I like to put the blue letters as the same letters as the verb and give the color to the auxiliary letters, the spelling change, because that spelling change represents the meaning of the auxiliary, just like ED, okay? And again, you can change these negative as well. Didn't run, didn't fly, didn't bring, or you can make questions, same as these ones, okay? And so there are many irregular verbs, but most of the verbs in English are regular, thankfully. And usually when we create new verbs in English, which happens sometimes, they start as regular and probably never change, right? So this is a more common one. These ones are less common, but you have to kind of remember them. So, but I hope this helps you understand how they sort of interact and what did do really represents or really shows us in English, okay? So in the next part, I'm just going to talk about the meaning a little bit more. We're going to use some examples to look at that with some actual sentences. So join me in the next part. Okay, before we get to the examples, let's just take a moment to talk about the meaning of did do, okay? So when we use did do in English, what we're really trying to represent is past truth. Just like simple present is for present truth or future truth even, we talked about in one of the previous videos. Past truth is did do. Now, I'm not saying you can't lie, but the grammar represents truth, and lying is what you believe in your head happened and what you say and how those things are different, okay? So lying involves more than this. So I'm not saying that this is always true, but when you use did do, you're trying to show the other person that it's true, okay, of the past. And so a lot of times we use it to talk about past facts or past general facts about the world or about your life. But often those in our minds are just past events, things that have happened in the past that take place during specific times or periods of times. And actually I forgot one here. And a big thing about this is that they are finished. And I'm going to write that. Maybe it's good that I forgot it so I can write it here and sort of put a little star by it. And so we're talking about finished events at a specific time. So by a specific time, I mean, you could say at 6 o'clock in the morning or yesterday or last month or periods of time, which could, be years. For example, I played basketball. I don't play basketball anymore, but it was, a good 10 years of my life. And so I'm not just talking about a point in time, I'm talking about a period of time, a length of time. But those things are finished. And even past facts, for example, the sun rose in the morning, something like that. even represents a period of time. Okay, so let's look at some examples. Welcome to the last part of the video where I'm going to just go through 4 quick examples so that we can finish this video off as fast as possible. Okay, so here we go. The first example, and before I start, actually, all of these are considered, past truth. Okay, a fact. The company built my house. That's a fact. That's true. So I'm going to look at these as if they are true statements. Okay. Only the last one is not true, really. Actually, the second one is not true either, because I'm much older to have graduated last year. So really, this one here could be considered a lie, and so could this one. But the grammar, the statement, using ed shows that these are meant to be true, truth about the past. Okay, and then we look at specific points in time, right? Okay, the company built my house. That's a period of time, probably a month maybe, or something like that. I graduated last year. That's a period of time, or even a point in time. For like the graduation ceremony would be a point in time, but even that is 2 or 3 hours long, so it's still even a period of time. Okay, I lived in Korea for 4 years, also a period of time, and they didn't pay me, which would be close to a point in time, but still for how long? 2 weeks, 1 month. Okay, but what you have to understand as well is that these things are all finished. Okay, they no longer happen, or they're not happening again and again and again. Okay, so here we go. The company built my house. So when I ask my students, I always say, find the verb. What's the action? And so the verb here, what is it? And everybody usually says built, but really the verb here, the verb itself is build, right? That's the word, that's the verb itself. Okay, so if I ask my students, what's the verb? They'll say build. And I say, correct. Then I'll say, what's the auxiliary? And well, you can see the auxiliary right here. It's this spelling change, right? And so then my students will say, well, the auxiliary is did. And I would say, well, can you see it? Is it marked? And they would say, yes, I can see it, right? It's the spelling change, right? So the verb was build. We added did to this to represent past truth. And it changed the spelling, right? And now we can see it right there, okay? So this is built, which would be, if we wanted to say it another way, which would be did build. And if we wanted, this is normal meaning. And if we want to say it strong, we would move this over and we would just say did build. The company did build my house. Negative, didn't build. Just add that negative in. And if we wanted to make the question, again, we'd move it all the way over to the front. Did the company build my house? Because you're moving it around, right? It's your choice as to how you use it. It can be the negative here. It can be the normal, so the spelling change. It moves around, right? It's not something you add. It's something you bring around. Not, well, you add it right at the beginning, but once it's here, you can move it around. Here's another one. I graduated last year. So this one's a little easier because it's the ed that everybody knows, right? So what's the verb? Well, the verb is graduate. You can see it right here. And what's the auxiliary? Well, it's right here. And what does that represent? Well, that represents the word did, the same as the spelling change does. And so if I want to use strong, I would move this over, say did graduate, negative, didn't graduate, question, did I graduate last year? Or did you graduate last year? And so again, you can see it moving around the sentence to create the meaning and the grammar all at the same time. Okay, here's another one. I lived in Korea for 4 years. This one is ed again, so it's a little easier to see. They're all marked. You can see every one of them. Okay, so I lived in Korea. What's the verb? Well, the verb would be live, L-I-V-E. Okay, what's the auxiliary? Well, the auxiliary is did. Remember, every verb in English, when you use it, has to have an auxiliary because the verb is the action, the auxiliary is the reality, the context, the perspective that that action occurs in, right? Because you have to have both. Let's look at the last one. They didn't pay me. I put a -1 in here. This one's pretty easy to see. Okay, so what's the verb? The verb is pay. What's the auxiliary? Well, it's didn't. It's the negative auxiliary. Now, here's a good question. What if I wanted to join this together to create, you know, the normal positive? It would be like this, right? It would be I, P-A-I-D. I paid. Right? And you can see how that would join together if you want to bring it back in and create the normal meaning. Okay, so this is how did, do joins with verbs to create what you guys know as simple past, but you can think about as the past truth, the truth about the past, usually events, things that happened at points in time or periods of time, and they're finished. So they're no longer happening anymore. Even though they're still true. Okay, so I hope that helps. Thank you very much for watching my videos and supporting the channel. So if it helps, share it with your friends, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hopefully I'll have a new video sooner rather than later. Have a great day.